Why did you launch him 80
You
feet
told
in
me
the air?
to boat flip him!
I didn't tell you to launch him 78
I
feet
flipped
in the
him
air.
in the boat, didn't I?
Send it to the moon.
I sent it! You said boat flip him!
Oh, yeah.
Do you fish? No. You know, people who don't fish think that fishing is lazy or boring, but it is the complete opposite. There are 100 little decisions to be made, variables to be considered, and you're never quite sure what made the difference. Did I cast too high, too far to the left? Did I reel it in too slow or too fast? Is the lure too shiny or too dull? Do I stay here or should I go over there? And you know it's not luck, but you do not know by how much. Because I am never, disappointed out here because I don't expect anything, because anything is possible. I can be hopeful out here, even in failure. Because I know if I just go out there around that tree, it might be different. Something might be different. Something I do might make a difference.
On my property, you didn't win shit in my yard.
Wait.
All of you.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your host, Thomas Ahrens. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
We are having technical difficulties as we do here with our Pennsylvania internet. How's everybody doing tonight? It was a crazy weekend. The first weekend that people were allowed to have boat tournaments on the tidal Potomac. It has been crazy this year with the amount of high wind we've had. It seems like every Saturday, every Sunday, the weather's just not favorable. This weekend, though, it was. And my goodness, was there a lot of boats and kayaks out. Everyone enjoying that weather. We'll be getting into that with some fish reports in about 2 weeks, I think, is when we're going to talk about just kind of the boat pressure on the tidal Potomac. But I wanted to venture back up to the mighty Susquehanna River with this guy who was one of, I think, the first guests. We are closing in on 300 episodes in less than 3 years, honestly. And he was like, I think, one of our first 20 guests that we had on. And so we're bringing this guy back, the man, the myth, the legend, Chris Gorsuch. Chris, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
You're very welcome.
It has been a while since we've gotten to speak. And so really the first thing is like, how are you doing? And what have you been up to the past year?
Well, really enjoying this wind that we've had, right? It's not wind and rain. One of the unlikely outcomes of wind and rain is usually a little bit more elbow room on the river. So I'm learning to embrace it. I mean, today my clients were a little bit disappointed that the wind forecast changed from a very mild 6 to 10 to a 10 to 20 north winds. And I said, well, one of the advantages will be we'll see a few less boats if this wind does get bad. And sure enough, there was several boats that pulled in early, but there wasn't that many boats when we came back to the ramp. So.
As I get older, I kind of look back on when I was a kid, and the old gentleman there that would take us out would be like, it just didn't used to do this back in my day. And sadly, I'm getting to that age, and I'm looking back to last spring, and it's like I don't remember it being so windy and wet in a couple of years. And as a smallmouth guy, I think about the Shenandoah River where we had 2 years with such high flood times right at the spawn, and it really affected it. Do you see this having any issues for the Susquehanna fishery?
Well, I mean, we had the Delaware River and the Susquehanna, the Juniata, those fisheries up here. We had those floods in the early 2000s, 2004, I think 5 and 6 or 4, 5, 8. Then we had the 100-year flood in 10 or 11. So we've seen it. We've seen, the river go through ups and downs, because of those. And then we've had really low years, like I think it was 2000, 2001, where it was just really, really low. And we've seen that devastate, the bass population with Culbinaris. But I think things cycle. I mean, I think we're clearly, we hate to admit it, but I think we're clearly seeing our seasons shift a little bit, right? Where December really is not as bad as it used to be, and I don't know if February is as bad as it used to be either. So you can fish almost all year long, and I think that we're seeing the swing. The crazy stuff is we're seeing our hottest days and our coldest years, coldest years, just a few years apart. I think I did a study that I did in one of my seminars this year where I was taking a look at the hottest days, hottest years and coldest years. And boy, I'll tell you what, in our top 10 in the last 100 years, I think in the last 15 years, we've had 2 of each of those top 10s, right? So 2 of the hottest or warmest years and 2 of the coldest years in that same 15-year window. So it's not like, I know the big phrase was global warming, but there certainly seems to be a cycle where we're having some kind of a climate change in our area. we're becoming closer to the big sticks line up here than people think, because we're getting that very mild winters the last couple of winters. And with that, you tend to get more rain and maybe more wind because of what's going on, right? The ocean plays a big role. You know that better than anybody.
Yeah. And as always, guys, before I asked, really, I want to add to that is like, how do you think this will actually affect us going forward? As always, I'm giving away prizes to our sponsors, Tiger Crankbaits and Jake's Bait and Tackle. Ask a good question. If I bring it up on the show, you win the gift card. It's that easy. So ask questions away. Segueing back to what I was saying, what you were saying earlier, how does these extremes affect things? I was blessed last week for Monday Night Live that I was able to hold a Department of Wildlife Resources for Virginia seminar on tidal bass fishing. And we talked about SAV and how tidal fluctuations can affect it. Will these blow out, if we have a lot of sustained rain, will that affect the grass on the Susquehanna?
It'll delay it, right? It'll delay it. It'll probably spread it over time, right? It depends on when it comes, right? So right now we have it. What people may not realize is that 3 weeks ago we had near 60-degree water. And then it dropped into the upper 40s, and it's been in that 48 to 55 degree for the last 3 weeks. But there for a while, at the end of March, beginning of April, this was end of March, we had the creeks were at 60 something, the river was at 60 or 59, and then it crashed. We had that really big cold thing. I think that does more damage immediately than the high water, right? Because our high water has been high, but it's been right to action stage, but it hasn't been that super terrible stuff, right? So further upriver in the North Branch, they've been seeing a little bit higher stuff. And we've certainly seen a lot of mud this year. I mean, we're still way, way above what we're supposed to have for rain, and our levels are pretty high. And a lot of the lakes, like for the Juniata, upper Juniata, they've been releasing. They just stopped releasing a couple of days ago. And we're just starting to get, normalized water on the Susquehanna, but those fish they're incredible. I mean, we've been forced to fish it mostly because out of sheer boredom of sitting more than one day in the house, right? We've been fishing it, and I don't know that I want to do a trip when the river's at or just below the action stage, but it's amazing how many fish you can catch. It's just dealing with the garbage in the water, right? But I mean, I don't think the spawn can sustain it. But most of the spawns are using the creeks. I mean, there's been a number of people who have shared with us, for years that the creeks are really sustaining some of these bigger rivers, and I think that's true. But I mean, I will it cause a problem? I would rather see a flood now, before all that grass gets in there, because it'll spread grass and it'll spread that Japanese knotweed like you won't believe if that stuff starts to go to seed.
What type of vegetation are you seeing right now? Or
very little.
Prevalent?
It's just very little right now. I mean, we're just our trees up here are just budding. The grasses are not emerged from the river at all right now. We're behind, I think, a little bit. We were so far ahead coming into the year, but I think this colder end of March and early April has set things back. I mean, the spawn, in my opinion, there's been a few fish that have gone in some of the creeks, and a few fish in the rivers they're not even close yet. They still have another week or 2 or 3 before they even start thinking about it. I really do. I mean, we're some areas are closer than others, but I think my water temperature today was 49.8 in the morning and 52 degrees, 53 degrees in the afternoon. And last week when I left the water on Friday night, I think it was 55, so that dropped 5 degrees over the last couple of days with this cold front. So, our next full moon is in 2.5 weeks. I still think that the majority of those fish are going to go then, but that's really for the biology department, not for me. It's a guesswork. I've caught a few fish that were spawned out, but right now they're packed. They're very, very thick.
I had Billy Coles on a month ago down at Smith Mountain Lake, and he keeps a really good journal and documents every year, everything. And he had an interesting hypothesis because down there for the BFLs and for his guide service, he feels like it went from winter to spawn time real quick, and there wasn't a long drawn out pre-spawn because of the weather conditions. And he also thinks maybe that somehow the solar eclipse also played some stuff into that, messing up with their biorhythms. Do you think all that together is probably why we're seeing what we're seeing now?
So some fish have definitely gone, and I've talked to friends and said I think there's been a few confused fish, meaning that they've gone a lot sooner. So some of the creeks got fish a lot sooner than I've ever seen them get it before. That was in February. February, the creeks were starting to load up with fish, and when it was warm, those creeks got up temperature really, really fast. But when it's cold at night, they drop really quick because of the volume of water. So I think some of the fish prematurely got on beds, but I don't think it was very successful, and I don't think it was a lot of them, right? I think the fish were in some of these creeks really, really fast, but I don't think that I love the term that they were tricked into doing something early, but I don't think that it helped. I think they pulled back, and I think that we're going to see a big run here in a couple of weeks.
I think
I'm seeing a few fish with the worn tails. I'm seeing a few fish that with the distended bellies, or where they've laid their eggs. But if I catch, like today, we caught 50 something fish, and the day before was like 70 something. So if I'm honest with what I'm seeing, I'm starting to see a bit more buck bass in the last couple of days, but I'm also starting to see some giants. And we're weighing a few more of our fish just because I'm evaluating some scales for upcoming article I'm doing. So just want to see how close these scales are to how accurate they really are. And we're measuring. Fish are a little heavier than I thought they were. I mean, just in the last 10 days, they're actually gaining weight, so which makes me think they're going to pop soon. It can't all be crayfish and smallmouth and bait weight. It's a lot of it is just, it's like a pregnant woman type thing, right? It's being held at the right areas. And I think I've told people in the next 10 days is really when you're going to start to see some of these really, really heavy fish, before you get into November.
You were testing scales. Can we get like a sneak peek of the article? I don't want to spoil anything.
No, I'm just looking at some of the higher end ones. We're not going crazy. We're just looking at some of the digital scales that have, memory, and we're comparing some that do the decimal point and some that do the pounds and the ounces. And so we're looking at them to see, grabbing two of them off the shelf and then using both on the same fish real quick, just having them set up. And then we're doing some tests between one brand A versus brand B as well to make sure that, so we're testing them against themselves to see how accurate they are. One run out of a package and another run out of the package. And then we're doing them side by side just to see how close they are. Because, my biggest problem is that if someone measures a fish that's 21 and a half inches, everybody usually gets the same scale that says it's 20, the same measurement, 21 and a half inches. But my largemouth guys go, well, how much did it weigh? It's like, man, I have no idea. But it's knowing that if you're looking at some of these tournaments that they're having, they're weighing fish, are they, it just seems to be less suspect if you just go by the length, but it is kind of interesting to know what the weights of some of these things are. So I was curious. I'm seeing a lot of people who, claim they're catching certain size fish, and I won't give you the sizes or anything, but we've been measuring a lot of our fish, just trying to do it as part of just this article. And it's interesting that it's a little closer than I thought it was going to be. It's not as far off as I thought it would be. Now we're using only digital scales, and we're using, I think right now we've looked at 3, but I'm looking forward to it. The article still has a way to go. There is a little bit of a difference. So.
It's interesting because we brought it up, for everyone listening right now, we got about 45 people kind of piling in here. Please like it wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Instagram. It helps push it in the algorithm. I'm on the Black Bass Advisory Board for Maryland, so we help with legislation and stuff there. And the big push is really that tournaments, the weigh-in tournaments, they're going to be modified in the future at some point, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. I think, and this is what the big argument is how can you do a weigh-in format like the kayakers do? Because they do catch photo release. How can you implement a catch weigh release? Like now in Major League Fishing, that's one thing because you can pay a dude to be in the boat with you. But for the common men, you can't. Do you think there's a scale technology that could eventually get here that allow for that?
Not inexpensively, I don't think, right? Because even if the fish bounces around a little bit, right? It's I like the measurement, and I like algorithms that are based off the measurement, and I like the fact that they can do it. They can put the fish in a certain way and hold it down, and you've got your camera guys are pretty good at that. It would be interesting to see if they could, because you know how the light is with these things. Taking a picture of it with the fish, it gets tough in a kayak world. You know, bless those guys. To get those pictures and those shots, that takes a lot. It really does. It's not as easy as it looks. Let me tell you that. With a fish in your lap and that thing in your lap and hold the camera and making sure your card is there. That's a technique. So it's easy for me in the boat because I have guys who are they're just fishing. They land the fish, and then I can just really quick before I release it, put it up. I have them set up. They're always on. I'm going through batteries like crazy because I always have them on, so I can just quick get a measurement, grab the other one, get a measurement, and then just take a little note on my cell phone as to what size they were. And some of these are great because they hold the top 5, 10, 8 fish that you have. And it's kind of fun at the end of the day to say, hey, your top fish were X, Y, Z, and this was your weight for the day, which is kind of fun.
We got Matthew really stating the first thing here. Fish limits are set off length. Why not tournaments? I like catch, photo, release. There is something built into our brains as anglers. Maybe this is because of Ray Scott back in the day. It's weight is a factor there. It is. There's something. I don't know, Chris. I've thought I fished.
Well, I can give you an example here, right? So, we had an incredible day Friday with size, and I don't want to. I mean, I'm sure everybody who fished on Friday had an incredible day size, but it was just we had 10 bass over 19 inches and some that were as big as almost 22. So that's just not a common day for me. But we had a 20 3/4, way more, significantly more than a 20 and 21 and a half, to give you an example. So both spectacular fish, both beautiful fish, but one just was gigantuan. It was just thick, right? Just a thick bass. Both were beautiful. Both were trophies. But if you're looking at it, one would have won the length thing, but not the weight thing. So I think that's always a discrepancy for some people. And I've had some 19s that were caught that were thin, either because they had just spawned or they just didn't have the same genetics that some of these other fish have. And I've seen clients go, well, that's a nice fish, but it's not as nice as that other 19. So to answer the question, I like length. I like length as a gauge. But I think that what people who are using the length, they usually use the number of quarter inches, or the number of inches as a guide, or they use a cross reference for a 19-inch fish will be 3 pounds 9 ounces, for example, or whatever it comes out to on the chart, and then everybody uses that as their weight. The reality is that every 19 is different. Right? There's a range, but every one is different, and then once in a while you'll get these 19s that will weigh more than a small 20. So, it's just one of those things where I think that's why the weight is the desirable thing here. But catch, photo, release putting it on one of those either catching boards or one of the other cradling boards. There's no faster way to measure a fish than that. No safer way, right? You dip in the water, you put your fish on there, you nose them up to the bump board, and boy, you've got your size right away.
So we got some questions off Instagram. As always, guys, if you want me to show your question, StreamYards does not let me share Instagram or Twitter because it's stupid. So I'll just read this one off. But if you'd like your comment to be posted up on there, go to YouTube or Facebook. Hidden Rivers Journal says, I can't watch now. Will this be uploaded? I could listen to Chris for hours. Yes, this will be re-uploaded tomorrow morning as a podcast and back on YouTube. It'll also be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. We have PA Kayak Bassin. Creeks were running 61 last week. And then let's see, I think there was one more good question. Here we go. Always Bent Fishing OC. We did well at Deer Creek last week. Small and largemouth. The high water was neat to see. Yeah, I've never fished there really in super duper high water before. Like, will they actually hold off? Regardless of water temperature and time, if the water stays high, will they hold off because they're not used to those water conditions?
I think they go to where they're comfortable. I mean, I really do. It's certainly walleye won't, and other things that use current, but I don't think the bass will. I think they like to be at their home water, right? And they'll hold off as long as they can. But genetically, when she's ready to go, she's just going to go. So I don't believe that they'll not do it in high water. I just think that they'll look for the nests that are there. There's places where even in the middle of the river that you can't get to when the water's high, but those fish are protected enough in there to drop. So the creeks, the hard part with the creeks is that a lot of these fish that enter the creek earlier in the year, they might be, and this is going to sound crazy, and I'll probably get some hate mail for it, but some of these fish are going to be 8, 9, 10 miles up into that creek, places where you can't get to easily by jet boat. And of course, guys who are drifting or kayakers who want to put up river and come down, they know this to be very true, right? That there's some really big river fish way, way up. I just know from some of my friends who fly fish and they do float trips, there's fish in some of these rivers, some of these creeks, these bigger creeks, that are clearly 12, 13 miles up from the mouth of the river, where it enters the river, the confluence. And they're way out.
When we say creek, because I think it's like, so you have the Susquehanna, but then you also have the Juniata. And I've heard
so the Juniata is a big creek to them. That's a big creek.
That's okay. Cool.
And then creeks from there are creeks to it also, right? So you have dozens and dozens and dozens of creeks there. When I usually say creek, though, I'm talking about, the Conner de Gwinnett, the Sherman's Creek, little Juniata, which is kind of a small one. There's a bunch of really like tiny creeks like Powell's and the Armstrong, and then there's some larger ones like Penn's Creek, and of course you've got the Juniata and then branches of the Juniata. They're all tributaries to the river. So, but I think when most people are talking about creeks, they're talking much smaller than the Juniata. Right? So they're talking some of these other creeks, and some of the creeks, when the water's high, you could go 15 miles on a jet boat if you wanted to. The question is, should you? But as you could, right? And then most of the creeks, when it's normalized, you can go up them 1, 2, 3, 4 miles, and usually the bass will go up until where they're comfortable. So each year may be different. Maybe they're drawn up, but I know that there's, within the first 500 yards of a creek, there's spawning fish, and I know that 8 miles up there's spawning fish. So what drives each of them up to a different direction, I'm not really sure. But whether it's genetically they were born there, so they go back there, and certain years when they can't, then they lay their eggs in a different area, and then those eggs are genetically disposed to only going up 2 or 3 miles maybe. I'm not really sure how it works. I would be fibbing if I said I did.
Then it sounds like you got that salmon vibe with them, that they almost go back to where.
I think that's all. I think is very true. But if there's something that's catastrophic, like a flood or something where they can't get up there, or you don't get the rain where they can get up there, but I can usually time the creeks. I know the creeks from my notes, which creeks gets fish first, which ones get them last, and I pretty much know when the water temperature on the main river is a certain temperature. I know after a certain amount of water comes into the river, whether it's rain or ice melt, that those fish are going to go up those creeks. You can almost set your calendar by it. If you're in late February and you've got the temperatures at a certain level, and you get a blast of warm rain and it raises the creeks and the rivers, you'll get an influx of fish late February into these creeks, some of these early creeks. And some of the other creeks don't even get a fish until like mid-April. Some of the creeks are just getting fish right now.
Wow.
Yeah. There's the colder creeks, the creeks that are, more trout type stream creeks that are true limestone creeks. They've only been getting their fish for the last couple of weeks.
What about the Juniata? We have Juniata. I know the comment section here. My apologies. My Virginian pronunciation, as Matthew says, there is no Julie here. Yes, Juniata. Thank you. PA Kayak Bassing says, what about the Juniata? What is happening there right now when it comes to fish migration?
The Juniata is a pretty hot spot right now. It was difficult to fish last week because Racetown was releasing water. So it was at a higher level than most people are comfortable fishing, especially from a paddlecraft. But that's pretty much off the hook right now. I think people are finding an extremely good bite in the Juniata right now.
I've had Ethan on from New River Guide Service, and we talk about how most of the New River is is subject to Crater Lake Dam, and that really keeps it like a very unique thing because it's very consistent with its levels. Generally speaking, the water runs a little bit cooler because it has that really big reservoir that pulls water. How does having a raised town right there affect Juniata compared to the other part of the Susquehanna? Does it just always run colder? Are the fish a little bit different there? And
No,
how
I think
are
it runs a
spawning
little
habitat?
warmer. I think the dam releases water from underneath, so in the summertime it can be cooler, in the wintertime it's warmer. So because where it releases in the dam, it releases it when the water's, in the wintertime, the water's warmer on the bottom than the surface, right? So it's really releasing warmer water than what the cold winter would be offering the flow. So it's a little bit warmer on average than the Juniata. Juniata is than the Susquehanna. The Juniata's biggest problem over the last 20 years is the amount of grass that it has. So the lower 8-9 miles of that river, it's pretty grassy. It's pretty grassy. It's been growing. I mean, I remember in my youth it being grassy, but not like this. I mean, it's choked some summers. It's just absolutely choked, which is good for the fish. Tough for the fishermen. It's very tough to get your bait to the fish, right? Without getting caught up in it. And some people have some pretty cool techniques, but the Juniata, I think, is helping hold the population of the fish. I think it's one of those great tributaries that it has a lot of tributaries on its own. So if the years are high, it's got a lot of support fish and it's got a lot of fish in it. And this time of year, its population is probably double because of all the fish that come into it from the Susquehanna. So does that make sense?
Yeah, we've talked about ad nauseum on this show, the importance of SAV. And maybe it's a chicken or the egg thing, but is the reason the Juniata is so hot right now, how much of it has to do just because it has such healthy subaquatic vegetation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can just tell you this. There was reports that went out about the Susquehanna River being, in peril or in trouble with its pollution. And I'm not knocking it because we all know that, there's houses are constantly going up and that the sewer treatment plants are not designed to take care of some of the micro stuff that there's out there, right? Especially some of the drugs and stuff that are out there. So there is a level of pollution in Susquehanna that is true. It's quite evident, right? And there are populations of fish that are disappearing from it that they are called indicators. Like I think there was a conversation not too long ago about where did all the rock bass go? And some people, and I have to be honest with you, it's just those flathead catfish that probably ate all them things. But the truth of the matter is that they were declining before the catfish were there. So there are some indicators. There are some indicators that the river isn't necessarily as clean as we would like it. But boy, you cannot argue the amount of forage in that river. There's so many crayfish. There's so many the balls of the bait balls of minnows that I have seen this year, mostly the emerald shiners. I don't think I've ever, in the last 2 years, I don't think I've ever seen that many just gigantic bait balls of emerald shiners in the rivers like I have in the last 2 years. I mean, I've always seen them, but not as frequently. And it's been higher, so harder to see them, and yet I'm still seeing them. There was a gigantic one. It had to be almost 5 or 6 feet in diameter. I'm looking at it, and the way that the minnows are moving, it looks like there's grass in there. I'm thinking there can't be grass growing here. There's not enough. The grass hasn't had a chance to really grow yet. And I'm looking at these things waving in this pool that I'm behind, and then I realize it's not grass at all. It's these emerald shiners. They just look like they're just almost still in one gigantic ball, but they were just moving and swaying like grass would, like eelgrass would. And it was just under the surface, and it's like, wow, that's a big group of fish. And then they would disperse, and what was dispersing was probably some kind of a game fish that was dispersing them. But it was just interesting to see. And I mean, every day I'm seeing just gigantic, great big bait balls like you would see on the ocean, right? Just so amazing cool. How much is out there. And the fish get on the boat, and I have to clean it every day. There's just crayfish parts and minnows and other aquatic insects. They're just full. They're just full.
That's so freaking cool. A question that I've had a lot in my comments section, and I've had people reach out to me for some reason just to complain that, there's too many jet boaters out there. There's too many kayaks now. The river is completely pressured. 400 years ago when I was fishing, it didn't fish like this. But then I have biologists come on, and people like you, they say, look, there's bait everywhere. There's fish everywhere. And it's like, I think between the two extremes of the argument, there's probably the medium ground, and that's probably what reality is. Like, where are we in 2024?
I think there's more fishing pressure than ever before, right? And I think that those things are all accurate, right? I mean, there's more kayaks, there's more jet boats, there's more people who are working from home, right? There's more freedom in people's daily work than there was ever now. It's very popular. Shows like this, my writing, things like that, it's a very popular sport. I don't think it harms the fish. I mean, I would like to, but years ago, I was so worried about it harming the fish. They just turn off. They'll get tired of, you'll move them, right? They'll get tired of eating. They'll get tired of moving. They'll get tired of being pressured, and they'll just move, and you'll have to go find them. Is it convenient for them in the wintertime? Probably not, right? That's probably the worst time to be targeting them. And I would like to say that I don't do that, but I do enjoy fishing in the winter. I don't guide in the winter, and there is less pressure. But these fish, they're amazing. They'll move. I mean, they're just day to day. They get pressured. If someone fishes that hole hard and another person comes in and hits it, they're going to stay or they're going to go, and they'll just turn off. They'll just turn off. I mean, I've seen them. I've seen them self-educate. So I just think that there's a lot of pressure, but the fish don't seem to be at a harm for it.
My hot take on that, though, is because you're so right. I think if you had to pick a season to shut down, it wouldn't for river smallmouth. I'm gonna preface this. It wouldn't be the spawn. It would be the winter, because how much they congregate in a couple of areas that can get just bombarded. I saw this on the Upper Potomac when they had a tournament out of Hancock, Maryland. We know the eddy, everyone there. It's like it's right there, and you have 1,000 boats on top of them. I mean, right. It could potentially be an issue compared to the spawn.
Yeah, I mean, no, but as soon as you bring up the word canceling something, I personally really like the old, sometime in May, shut it down for 4 or 5 weeks and do it. The problem is that sometimes in those years that they had the moratorium, that you couldn't fish for bass to it. You had people doing it anyway because they said, well, I'm not really fishing for bass, right? So I'm fishing for walleye because it's a great walleye. Out behind these rocks in the middle of the river, there's a great walleye fishing. But the Pennsylvania law enforcement, the Fish Commission, basically said there's almost no way for us to enforce it, so we're just going to drop it. And I like many, immediately thought that was going to be bad, right? But I think that most anglers kind of recognize that picking on the bedding males and females, which are a very short period of time when they're together, and then picking on the males afterwards is kind of a mistake. And most people don't want to catch those males. I mean, some people do, right? Some people do. I've been with so many different people in so many different states, have lots of different views on it. If you have a huge bird population, if you have cormorants and you have mergansers and you have, loons and other things, some of these birds are beautiful to look at, like the loons and stuff like that. But you got to recognize how big of a fish that they can devour. So if you're an angler and you're disrupting, 30, 40 cormorants on a big rock in a spawning area, you're helping that spawning situation. You're not hurting it. But you also have to police yourself, right? So I think people know where the spawning areas are, and it's, to stay away from it during those. They're on and off the bed so fast in the river. It's just such a different thing. I mean, I have spawning areas I check. I won't start checking them yet, but I'll start checking them just to see. And just because fish are in there doesn't mean the fish are spawning. There's a very, very distinct area where these fish are going to be. And if you're in the current or on the current seam, you're not fishing for these. If you're on the current seams, I'm just telling you, you're not fishing for spawning fish. That's just a rule. You're behind an eddy in a gigantic area, and there's a giant eddy, and you're throwing up towards that, and the fish are spawning at that time, you're catching spawning fish. You're hooking fish in the back of the heads, or if you're feeling fish, pick your bait up and you go to set it, and that fish is not there. That is a fish that has picked the bait off the nest and has moved it. Move on. You don't want those fish anyway. You want the bigger ones that are on the current seam.
And it's interesting because I feel like I think with any laws that get passed, it's a case by case situation. You know, classic example is when they were trying to ban spawning on like the tidal Potomac, and there's been so many studies done ad nauseum saying like it spawning, like fishing the spawn does not affect the fishing population. Statistically, it's not going to affect it. But then you go to like Lake Erie or the Great Lakes where those smallmouth are so aggressive where you could stick them, they're going to go right back to the nest to stick them again. And they're like, no, actually, we probably should ban it here because it does impact them. I really don't like when people on social media or people in legislation like, well, let's just do a broadband something. It's like that never really works. It should be a case by case basis, and at least that's what I'm seeing with working with Maryland for sure.
It's people are passionate on both sides of it, and they both have really good arguments on it. It's like I said, I was in favor of shutting down the big river. The problem is that when they did that, those of us that wanted to fish went 40 miles upriver and put pressure on those fish. So, you know, I don't really have a solution. It's
cause and effect.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is to police yourself, right? And we all know how valuable the fishery is. So if you can police yourself, I think you're better off at it. Just police yourself.
And we got a question here for Matthew, actually. Here we go. And then, as always, guys, ask a question, and you're going to win a prize tonight. I got Matthew says, how long does it take for water released from Raystown to reach the Susquehanna?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. So you can look at the charts. If you look at the charts last week, you'll see exactly how long. Because as soon as they turned it off, you can see it start to drop upriver. Like if you look at if you check upriver and see where that water is, and then check the three ledges down, the three volumes down, you'll see that go. It could probably be. It's going to be overnight. We're going to start to see it in some places, even though it's significantly fall. But once that faucet's turned off, once that dam release is turned off, it's just a matter of a couple of days, and that river will go. It was just stuck at 10 at the Newport gauge forever. Just like everything else was dropping, but the Newport gauge was at 10, and they were releasing a specific volume. And the moment that they dropped that volume down to like 75 or 80% of what they were doing, it was only a matter of days before not only was it down, but it was actually clearing. So it only took a couple days. It's short of looking at it on the website, I'd say 2 days. And it's a long distance, but it just happens because they're just releasing. It's just a big wall of water. They cut it down, and it starts immediately dropping where they have it, and it just runs right down the river. So it's only a matter of a day or two once they stop doing it. And they used to actually, I don't know if they still do or not, but they used to actually have a report that would say, due to 7 inches of rain, we're going to be releasing at this volume. The Corps of Engineers is going to release at this volume for this many days, and they're going to turn it off. But right now, it's near perfect. I'll just tell you that much.
Oh, we got another Brandon. Let's see. What are the most important water gauges to check? Brandon, you just want a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle? That's a good question. So I'm assuming, Brandon, do you mean like if you're like going out, like which ones above and below your spot, I guess? I'm assuming that's what he means.
So specifically for the Susquehanna, I mean, I'm going to speak to my own area. So anything below the Clarksbury Bridge, I think you really need to be using the Harrisburg gauge. And you have to, when you look at the Harrisburg gauge, you may want to start to look at the Juniata to make sure that Juniata's not peaking. Like, if the Juniata is really high and the Susquehanna is low it could be due to a release. Generally, if they're releasing out of the Juniata, if you trust the Harrisburg gauge, say the Harrisburg gauge is at 4.5 and Juniata is releasing in the summertime, and you think, oh, at 4.5, I can run anywhere I want to. And you go up north above where the Juniata comes into Clarksbury Bridge there. If you go above that, that river is going to look like 3.5 because it's not getting that flow that's coming down from Raystown. So you gotta keep both of them in your mind and know where they are. Usually, in the summertime, if the Juniata if Harrisburg is reading 3.9, you're somewhere around 7.8 to 8 foot at the Sunbury gauge. So keeping those three gauges in mind kind of help that this is having the gauge and understanding where each one is, because the Juniata will impact the lower gauge in Harrisburg, but have no impact upriver. And I've had people say, man, I ran this 70 years ago at 4 foot and I had no problem. Today I hit and I busted my intake on my jet boat what happened? And I said, well, because the Juniata is running high, it's giving a false reading on the Harrisburg gauge if you're above that point. So you've got this water that's flowing in, and you think you're running at 4.1, but really it's probably 3.5 or lower upriver. And you ran the same line you did last year at 4 foot. It's not the same. You need to be looking at what the Sunbury gauge is.
Dude, that is the absolute juice. We got another. This is going to be probably a 6-hour conversation with this question. Let me try it. This one's on Instagram by God help me with my Cood199. Cood199 asks, what do you change first? The color, the size, or the style of bait?
That's a great question. So here's what I will tell you: if you're working a finesse bait, and you're getting pickups, but you're not getting as many as you. I will change color, right? I'll change color. I'll change size a little bit, but color usually goes first, right? I'm usually trying to find the right color for the water color to try to match it or what the bait is. Profile is very important, especially with the Ned rigs now. Ned rigs, Ned bugs, Ned bombs, Ned this, Ned that. There's all kinds of different profiles you can throw. Some of the little baby creatures you got are fantastic. They're just the shape can just turn fish on. Today our shape was we were throwing tubes and it kind of went off. The guy reeled a tube in on the way in. He got smashed by a bass. It's like, okay, we're throwing swim baits and we're going to throw crankbaits and moving baits and spinner baits and things. And that worked out really well for a while. So, that fish telling us when we reeled the finesse bait, the tube in, right? That, we now throw something else. We throw swim baits, we can throw chatterbaits, we can throw other things. And then when that bite died down, we started to go back. And then for whatever reason, our bite just went, the morning bite was great. The middle of the day bite was so-so. And then we had this lull at about 2 o'clock. What's happening? And we started playing around with different things. And we found a little, the Ned bug or whatever it's called, it in a certain color was just boom. We got like 16 fish like that. So it's just playing around and trying to find it. It's nice. I love, a lot of clients like to take a lot of guides like to take one client out because it's easier. But for me, I'd rather have two because I want two fishing rods going at the same time. And I don't want anybody throwing the same thing until we really have a pattern that's locked in. So, usually in the morning, I'll start off somebody who wants to fish finesse, and somebody else that wants to fish a little bit more power fishing, if you will. So you just have those days. I will play a lot, right? If you're not catching, I'm changing. If we're not catching, I'm changing location. I'm changing the type of water I'm fishing. I'm typing the type of baits I'm throwing. I'm changing a lot. And then once I find it, I don't change it until something breaks, right? Once it works, if the clients are going to listen to my direction is once it's worked, don't change it, right? That's what they're dialed into that day. That's what we're going to fish. And then as soon as it slows down, I'm changing locations, I'm changing deliveries. And even to the point where, let's say I've got a great hole. I know the fish are in there. I like to fish it from the west side. And I usually catch them from the west side. If something happens, if the wind's acting differently, I'll go to the east side and fish that hole completely different. And you'd be surprised after striking out on that hole, just by moving the boat up and around and getting on the opposite side and changing my angle with the same exact bait, how I'll go from catching one fish and sitting there going, what are we doing wrong? To just moving the boat. I'm not coming back later in the day. I'm just moving the boat immediately over to the other side and say, okay, guys, I know this is going to sound crazy, but just would you do me a favor and throw in there from this direction? And you'd be surprised how many times we get lit up. Like, wow, they just wanted it coming. Whether the wind was impacting the bait that was impacting the directions that they were looking, or if they just were staged differently behind some kind of a rock or a tree floated in there or something. But just know that just sometimes just changing the angle and positions, that makes just a big difference.
It makes an absolute massive difference.
And there is really no book. I will change. If I'm getting hit on a color hit and I'm not getting hookups, I will change size, right? If it's a jerk bait and I'm getting hit but not getting lit up, like we're not connecting, I've got their interest, but I got to know if it's going to be size or color. That's a more difficult thing than when it comes to soft plastics, right? Because not only when you shift the color and the size of the bait, you now might be out of their zone for striking. So I like, if I've got a size that they're hitting, but they're not completely buying into it, they're not taking it, I'll change the color over the size because I want that bait to be down in the same area in that strike zone. Where with a finesse bite, you're usually right on the bottom. So if they're not eating it and then someone throws a bitsy tube and they're getting crushed, it's like, okay, it's the same exact color. It's a size thing for them. So and I go both directions.
I'd also add in to your question, boss, the vibration and also treble hook versus a single hook. And I think there's pros and cons to both. There are sometimes, like example is tidal Potomac, when I can't get them on a swim jig or a chatterbait because they're not taking it right. And I just know if I switch to a lipless or a crankbait, I'm going to get 6% more fish to the boat just because they're not eating it correctly. And maybe it's a confidence thing versus if I just switch colors or something like that. But
I'm amazed at how many people do not throw a crankbait. I am amazed at how many people get in my boat.
They kind of
go
work.
to me, I haven't thrown one of these since I was a kid. The guy's 60, 70 years old. And it's like, well, today you're going to be throwing them because this is what they're eating. And I mean, if I need to find fish, I don't care, from 45 degrees on up. So from March through November, even into early December, I'm going to throw some kind of a crankbait. And I've learned my lesson not to throw it when it's cold. I mean, the crankbait is just, it gets a bite even when the fish isn't even hungry. Okay? It just chases it down and eats it. It's probably one of the most consistent baits for me on this river all year long. I've always had one tied on. Unless it's like early February, I have a crankbait tied on.
Do you think the problem is, from an angler standpoint, there is now so many spinnerbait, chatterbait, jerkbait, like crankbait? Is there just so many categories now that what happens is anglers chase the trends of, well, the chatterbait's hot, so we only throw the chatterbait? Because it's interesting.
The nice thing about the chatterbait is that you can throw it places you really can't throw a crankbait. Like some guys can. Believe me, some guys can throw that crankbait some places so that I just would go, I can't believe that thing came back. And the chatterbait gives you that ability, right? And I'll go with the whopper plopper. I think the whopper plopper was so successful because you didn't necessarily have to have a cadence with it like you would with a buzzbait, right? With a buzzbait, you have to have a certain speed of your reel. You've got to get those blades spinning fast. You can't let it sit there. And then the whopper plopper came and it hit everybody like crazy. But it was basically a buzzbait that you could fish slowly, right? And it threw more water than a lot of the other prop baits that are up there, like a cripple killer or something like that. They're all very effective, but I don't think that they throw the kind of water, and the profiles is quite a bit different when you look at the whopper plopper. But whether you're looking at a jerk bait that is a mega bass or a jerk bait that's the tried and true X-Wrap, right? Or something else that's out there, whether it's a Realis or whatever you're looking at. There are some things about size and shape and how it works at certain times of the year, and it's hard to argue sometimes with the success that Mega Bass has with some of their baits. But I've had equal success on days with far less expensive baits. I think we all want to be sexy. We all want to have the newest thing that's out there. We always all want to have the greatest stuff. Does it make a difference in the end? I do think that there are some times that a different profile and a new profile can be a great thing. But you can't explain to me why that 1980s tube catches just as many, if not more, fish than everything else does.
I think it depends. I think this really sets up. This is you brought it up with Mega Bass. The baits that I would say Mega Bass excels at are their jerk baits. Why? It's a visual bait. 90% of it, I think, is visual in the profile. That's what really makes a smallmouth or a largemouth want to lock in on that thing. That's where you can get really creative with your paint designs and schemes. But if you go to vibration-based baits like a lipless or a crankbait, that's where you go to eBay and you find baits that aren't made anymore, like silent lipless, if you can find them, and they sell. They look ugly as hell. Why do they work? Because it's that noise. It's just a little freaking different. I don't know. I think that's a.
We have this conversation all the time, and you have to have both. So sometimes the rattles are a plus. They the one knockers or the hard knocks, or they're kind of good. And other times they don't want that thing making a lot of noise. They want something that's quiet, right? I mean, when a crayfish swims by, is there a little bit of a click that goes by with when their shells are hitting? And what does it make a difference when they're soft shell in that mode and they're not making nearly as much noise? So I know my partner Glenn loves quiet crankbaits, and I'm usually one that's an opera. So, but there is a time and a place. In size, sometimes they don't want a big profile. Sometimes that 1.0 or that 40 size just outmaneuvers the 60 size and the 1.5 or the 2. So I think you got to play. I think you got to play a little bit. We got
over 65 people watching. We got 49 on YouTube and Facebook combined, and we got a bunch more on Instagram. We got another interesting question. Like, do you think fish will ever get conditioned to the glide bait? This is JBruce12 on Instagram.
Conditioned to live bait?
Like glide baits, the glide bait craze.
Oh, man, that's a cool bait. We talked about this maybe a while back. That's when I was on with Mikey. That is a great bait, a fun bait. You got to be patient. And I don't know that's one of those things I can always be, is patient. But I think the glide bait market is still, somebody's going to come up with something, because they're just so varied. For the smallmouth world in the rivers, for me personally, I think I like the one hinge baits, right? The 2-piece versus the multiple piece, just for me. And I'm convinced that smallmouth do not understand size. They'll hit stuff that just, I would never have thought they would hit. Not every one, but I think that with the paint scales that are coming up, and the tails,
12 inches,
the fiber
if people
tails
don't
versus,
know, that's 12 inches.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how big those fish will hit. And there are some colors that work better, some shades that work better than others. And I think with the paint jobs that are coming, I still think that there's going to be, I don't know if they're going to get conditioned to them just too fast, because it just not from what I'm seeing yet. They have it with the jerk bait, and they do stare at that. They do stare at that bait a lot, but let me put it this way: I hope not. That's a fun bait to fish.
We got Travis Cyber. Travis Cyber says, Chris, I love listening to you the few times you came down to Jake's and spoke. Very precise with your answers and highly knowledgeable. I've heard some people talk about 2 days out of the year to never fish. Have you ever had days like that where you just can't seem to catch a single one? And what would you do if that happens?
So I've only been doing this for 18 years, and I say only because there's guys who have been doing this for 40 and 45 years, and bless their souls. That is just an amazing statement for anybody. It is truly a badge of honor to be able to say that you've done it for that many years. We have a 10 fish rule. You don't catch 10 fish on the boat, you can pay us for $50 for our fuel fees. That's the only thing you pay. I cashed that in twice in 17 years. Once we were really close to getting to the 10th fish, but it was really hard getting to the fish. And I just didn't feel comfortable taking someone's money at the 10th fish. So I gave him this option. I said, listen, we're going to hit this 10th fish, but it's not going to be a banner day. Would you like to just reschedule? And we'll just pretend the day never happened. The 3 hours or 4 hours we were out, you guys were killing yourself to catch the fish. And the river was getting worse. It wasn't one of those days where it just felt like it was going to happen. And the other time that it happened, oddly enough, I was with a biologist. I was with a fish biologist who told me, and I remember he said, some days, Chris, the fish don't eat. I said, nonsense. These fish are going to eat. We just got to find them. We just got to do it. And we tried. He was just relentless with telling me we're not going to find fish. And I just had everything inside me to find a few fish that would eat. And we found a few, but unintelligently, I always believe I can catch them, that I'm not doing something right, and somebody on this river in a different boat is catching fish right now. So I never say die. I like to catch them. I mean, I don't want to beat anybody up over it, but I've experienced that day once when there's nothing I could do. I threw everything, and I just couldn't get them to go. But I've had so many other days where it just seems like nothing was going to work. Nothing was going to work. And we picked up a white crankbait or a spinnerbait or, a fluke or something like that we used no weight on and just lit them up. So I think that 2 days a year, I fish about 200 and 225 days a year. So it might be 2 days that I haven't fished and it's cold or conditions are not right. There could be moon phases. When I fished a couple of moon phases where it was really tough on some of those super moons, and I fished some super moons when it's been good. That's a great question. I would like to believe that they don't exist. The ones that I've had, I've usually come on the top of. I've usually figured out something during the day to get it to work. And believe me, my boat looks like crap afterwards because we've got every lure out and we've got all my rods out and we are throwing at everything. And we're looking for current, shallow water, deep water, slack water, dead water. We're dragging stuff in what I'll call carp water just to try to find some fish that's willing to take something. So one day, it was one day when we just could not catch them. And I was with my biologist who was saying, I told you so. We feed these fish. Sometimes they don't eat. It's like, come on, they're going to eat something in that particular day. We ended up rescheduling because we could not get them. I think we had like 6 fish in the boat, and that was just one of those. I just literally was. I had marks on my forehead from smacking stuff. This can't possibly be happening. But.
Oh my gosh, Travis. Message me, bud. As always, everyone that want a gift card, please message me. fishingthedmv@gmail.com, Instagram or Facebook, and you can get your gift card. Matthew's got a really good question. What is your go-to crankbait?
Great question. So years ago, I got turned on to the Aska 40, which I think was probably one of the best baits. It was made by Jackal. Probably the best square bill crankbaits ever made on the planet Earth. If you can find these, they're really good. And I know that everybody who fishes these now realizes that there's no more to be had, and the ones you are going to find are very. So I can use that word. I can say which one is the incredible bait. Right now, I'm doing really, really good with just a KVD 1.5, or a 1.0. There's certain colors that I like. I like crawfish colors. They're really good. On the Delaware, we like shad colors or silvers, and silver or white. They work really good. Not that the shad colors don't, but sexy shad type things, they work really good there. On the main stem and the Juniata and the North Branch, that KVD is pretty slick. The Bandit 200 is really good. There's a Yazori out there right now. I think it's a Yazori 60, I think it is, or a 50. Yazori 50 is a pretty good one right now. That's been working well for me. I don't like to buy crankbaits that cost a lot of money because you're going to lose them. If you're going to throw them like I tell you to throw them, you're going to lose a bunch of them. And so, you're not going to lose a bunch of a day, but during the course of a week, I'll lose five crankbaits if we're not retying, if we're throwing into really heavy stuff. Because I like to make sure the crankbait's touching bottom. I like to make sure that we're digging at the bottom. And I'll tell you, if you're not catching on crankbaits, just vary your retrieval a little bit. Retrieve fast and slow up. Pause it for a second. Sometimes you've got fish trailing it and it just doesn't move enough. It's not zigging or zagging. So if you just stop it for a split second and start it back up, that fish is trailing. It's going to destroy it, right? So just throw it. And if you're not getting one on a crawfish pattern, something's wrong. And in this river, if you're throwing a crankbait and you've got a crawfish pattern, it looks natural crawfish pattern. If you're throwing that and you're touching bottom every once in a while and you're not catching fish, make sure that thing has hooks on it. Okay? That's one of those things that's just going to work. All the people on my boat will go, I never throw a crankbait. And they throw it 15 times and they catch their first fish and go, this is a blast. At the end of the day, you go, hey, I'm going to go, what kind of crankbait was I using? Because I'm going to go buy a couple of those because it just works. It just works.
You need a system too. And I have a multiple systems, but I like how you said varying the retrieve, because when I was younger, and I think this was in our high school fishing days, honestly. And I got paired with a guy, and he said I was trying to fish like a spinnerbait. He's like, you just crank it. He's like, what I want you to do is when you hit bottom, I want you to count every rock. And I was like, what the hell do you mean? I was like, I want you to try to count every rock. I want you to almost close your eyes and feel every rock and slow down to where you can every time feel it tick. I started catching them. And I was like, you were telling me to just slow down, basically. But it's true. It is so
I generally,
true.
I generally rock it when I throw it in. I mean, I reel it really hard, and then I slow down. And if I hit bottom or if I feel like I'm on something, I'll just stop it for a second, and that, my hands where you can see it, that bait will just start to shimmy up, and then it will just dart down. And a lot of times I'll say, hey, when you bring that back this time, stop it for a split second, and then retrieve it. Or when you get it close to the boat, just slow it down a little bit, and they'll catch a fish. And the next one they go, how did you know that? I said, I didn't know it. I saw that you were just reeling it in, and I thought maybe if you just slowed it down, that fish that's trailing, it's going to eat it. Mm-hmm. So it's just one of those things where, when you're bringing it in, if you just pause it for a second, or if you vary your speed just a little bit once in a while. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to go crazy. You don't not moving along, but just get it down there and make it. And sometimes, Bill, if you're in 4 to 6 foot of water, almost anything's going to work, right? But if you start to get yourself into really like 8 foot of water, 7 foot of water, and you're that bait just can't get down deep enough, you just need to go to a bigger lip or a bigger profile or more speed. But
would you
there's
change
so many
line
good
sizes
baits out there? I mean, I know guys who buy stuff, the cheapest stuff they can find, and then they just repaint them. I mean, they like to play with the paint schemes.
I agree with you, because this is the same thing why I think these things are a nightmare, is because I've been in a boat with a guy who he will try to almost get this thing snagged in 30 feet of water. Like, I can't do that because I don't want to lose it. It's the same with the crankbait. If you're not getting it into like some yucky stuff, you're not going to make it work. So why spend $50 on a crankbait? Get a bunch that are a little cheaper that if you lose them, no big deal.
Yeah, and there's just, I've seen, we'll go back to the weight thing. I've seen weight baits that were just absolutely looked like they went through hell. And the guy wouldn't sell it to you for any amount of money because that one works. And it's, it's got a wire hanging off of it, and it's not pretty anymore. It's got half the tail, bristle's gone. But there's something about that one that's working. So, there may be something about the wake bait as the expense of the wake bait versus the crankbait. But if you've got a crankbait, I don't care if it's a Big O or if it's a KVD or if it's a Uzori, or if you really feel that you have to have a megabass. And I'm not knocking if you want to get that bait. I just don't throw them because we decorate the trees with them. We decorate the bottom of the river with them. And, I just want something that's got decent hooks on it. And if I can't find the hooks I like, I'll just swap them out. So if I've got to buy a really expensive bait and I got to swap the hooks out on it anyway, I just would rather buy a cheaper bait. The biggest thing is making sure that they run straight. Right? You don't want one that's going to spin on you or turn sideways. I think that's a turn off to the fish. So if you can hit bottom with it, and you can, there will be days when they want a slower wobble, and so you might have to go to a more of a peanut size. But most of the time, one of those three sizes is going to work. The 40, the 50, the 60. Those are going to work. And when I say 40, 50, 60, I mean a 1.0, 1.25, or a 1.5. And then there's like the other day, one of the twos. I gave them twos.
So Tammy Merritt. Sorry, I can't speak English apparently. I am new to river fishing. How much do you use a fish finder in new water? Also, have you used the Strike King Hunter?
So I use mine a lot, but I don't use it for finding fish. I use mine for reading the surface temperature, because the bottom is not going to be too much different in the river because it's all mixing. I use it to see what kind of bottom I have. So if I'm not familiar with the area, I want to know depth, temperature, and I want to know what kind of bottom I have. That's what I mostly use mine for. If you're really going to be fishing deeper rivers, and I mean things that are 15, 16, 17, 25 feet deep, and you're looking for humps, and you really want to get into something that has like a 360 or a live scope, those things are wonderful. But in the river that I'm fishing down here, I mean, quite honestly, a really deep hole is 7.5 feet. And I don't think that the fish and the size of my, I'm in 4 to 7 feet right now all day long. And I think that with the band of what I'm looking at, I don't think that I can see the fish under the boat. I just know they're there because there's a currency. So if it's wintertime fishing, and that makes a big difference. Or if you're looking for, catfish or walleye, I think it's a big difference. But for a smallmouth bass fisherman in the river, when your river is, 3/4 of a mile wide and 2.5 to 5 feet deep, I don't know that your cone width is big enough to grab it. And I don't dislike, side imaging stuff. I just don't use it a lot. Right. I just find my fish. Now, wintertime's a different story. Wintertime, you can really make good use of it. And as far as that other, what was that king? What was the name of the
Strike King Hunter?
Yeah, I have not used that.
Let's see. And then guys, make sure you get your questions in because we're not going to be going for 6 hours tonight. So get your questions in now. We got Long Pang that asks, he's straight to the point here. What are the smallies hitting on the Susquehanna?
Crankbaits. That's right now they're hitting crankbaits really well. They're hitting tubes and creature baits really well. You just have to find the size and the color they want. It varies a little bit every day. It's I'm not really using anything that's more than 4 inches and nothing smaller than 3. Right now, that 3.5, 3.25, 3.5, 3.75 is really the keyed in size. You can use Ned rigs if you like, and you're going to catch big fish on the Ned rigs too. Some people think you won't, but you do happen to get a lot of those smaller fish on the Ned rigs because they're just, they really need that stuff. Spinner baits, I have not. I had a real good spinnerbait bite going a couple of weeks ago, and it's just kind of faded on me, which I'm really upset about. But right now, so I'm going to say tubes are working great. Creatures are working very good. Today, we put on I think last week when the water was a little dirtier, we were throwing the palmetto bug and that size creature. And then today we were throwing a much smaller one. We were using the Ned bug and doing fairly well.
What is with the
swim baits also?
Oh yeah, the glidey stuff and the swims. What's with the cult around tube versus Ned rig? Because I feel like it's the Cowboys versus the Redskins. Like there are people that will only throw tubes. There are people that only throw Ned rigs.
I know, and it's an absolute. I mean, the tube is hard to beat. It really is. It is, and there's just some types of water, some days with the certain levels and the wind, where the tube just seems to go through the water better, and days when the Ned just seems to go through the water better. I believe it's Crush City makes a little bit longer Ned rig. Can't remember the name of it. It might be a BLT, the Crush City BLT. That thing is just a little bit bigger than the traditional Ned rig, and I think I like that a little bit better. There's also so many different profiles for the Ned that just makes it a little bit more powerful than the tube at times, right? There's Ned paddle tails, there's Ned bombs, there's the creature baits, there's, you can fish, crawl baits on it. You can even fish some tubes on some of the Ned rigs. I have people in my boat who will not fish a Ned rig. I think that it gets, I don't know. They won't fish it. They'll fish a tube instead. And I have other people that will just fish anything that you want to. And they're both successful. So I don't know why you would want to go away from it. I think the colors that are available in these Ned profiles, the laminates and stuff, are just hard to beat.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because like the BFS culture, I think has changed smallmouth fishing a lot because now big companies are making stuff that are smallmouth size, whether it's walking baits, poppers, crankbaits. It's really fascinating. We had like a bunch of people join in. Let's see. Jake says, Thomas, you're live on MAKBF page 2. I know. Sorry about that. I will see if I can. If that's an issue, Jake, let me know. I just hit go live and everything that was connected just kind of did it because I was running behind today. I'm going to butcher this name.
Savas.
Thank you so much.
It's like Travis. This is how he told me. It's like Travis, but with an S.
Thank you. Savas. Chris is the smallmouth whisperer. Caesar Milan of bass fishing. Ben E. Do you change up the color of your crawl pattern crankbaits throughout the season? Do the crawfish change colors a lot in the Susquehanna?
They do. And I don't change my color because of the color of the crayfish, although I do change my tubes based on the color of the crayfish. So if you've ever seen old videos of me, you'll see me flipping over stones or taking a little net to see what I can grab out of the leaves or the rocks in the wintertime to see what color the crayfish are. And then I will mimic my presentation to look exactly like that blue bottom crayfish we tend to get in the colder weather. What I've been doing is throwing crayfish patterns and the brighter colors when the water is the dirtiest and lighter, more natural colors when the water is crystal clear. It seems to work. I've had success with it. I don't know if that's something I would hang my hat on. It's worth experimenting with, but I really don't change the colors based on what the color of the crayfish are when I'm crankbaiting, but I do change it with my soft plastics a lot. So in my crankbait, I have like 6 colors, and I use the brighter ones when the water is really, really stained and the lighter colored ones when it's clear, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't think a lot of when you guys get into this like super heavy and unhealthily addicted, you start realizing how much fish change, or not fish, the forage will change colors, whether it's the emerald shiner, depending on where they're located, the crayfish, depending on the time of year. It's just absolutely fascinating to me, like how much they evolve and they change. Let's see, we got 2 more questions here. Where was that last one? We got John here. John, you just won a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle. Message me on Facebook or Instagram or email me fishingdv@gmail.com. Have you used blade baits?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, blade baits work great. I don't use them with this time of year. I usually use them from like November all the way to the beginning of maybe the middle of March. And that's because the water I'm fishing is usually much deeper, but I love blade baits. Blade baits are fantastic. I have about 90 pounds of them. And when I use them, I plan on losing them because I like to be on the bottom. I like to be in snags. So, I absolutely do love blade baits. I usually have a company that makes them for me. I don't buy a silver buddy or a cicada, but I really do like them. And I don't buy those ones because I honestly will go through 10 in a day because I throw it out, and my method of using it in cold water is I throw it out, let it sink to the bottom and touch the bottom, and then I rip it off the bottom, and I have a certain way that I retrieve it that just, if I'm in a snaggy area, I'm going to lose one every once in a while. So, but great bait, and I throw them heavy. I like them to be ½ ounce. I like the big ones. I don't care how cold the water is; they'll eat the things.
You brought up an interesting thing, and maybe this could be kind of like our changing topics here is with the cicadas. How much will the cicadas impact the river this year? Because I heard some rumor like there's going to be like 1 billion of them coming out this year or some crazy number.
So a couple of years ago, we had a really big one, and the topwater bite was pretty phenomenal, right? So I think if they're landing in the water and the fish get triggered on them, and I think that it could be a great time for anything that makes a lot of noise on the surface of the water. So I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if they start to dominate, when something's on the top of the water, I don't think they think it's a insect or a fish. They just think it's something they can eat. And if they eat it and like it, I watched bass 15 years ago in southeastern Pennsylvania eating those lantern flies and spitting them back out. They still ate it. They still took them out, then they spit them out. But they still hit them on the surface. And I don't know if they ever got conditioned to them or not, but that day I was on the water, they were hitting them, and then you'd see them spitting right back out. Because either they didn't taste well or what was going on. But I've seen cicadas land in the water. I've seen dragonflies, crash land in the water, and it doesn't take long before a bass eats it. So, the companies that mimic that cicada, they'll bring that cicada bug back, and it'll be something. It'll work. It'll be good. It'll be a great food source for a lot of things, right? And certainly for the bass. So if it's going to trigger a bite on the surface, I'm all for it.
100%. And then if you guys that like to fly fish, I remember Travis Eden, Kingfisher, told me like there was the greatest topwater carp bite ever. And he had guys that would go out that one year and you could just fly fish and catch almost every carp in the river on topwater. It was crazy. Let's see. We got 2 more questions here, guys, and then we're probably going to be starting to wind this thing down. Let's see. Couple says, what size line do you run on your bait caster? Any preference in type with so many to choose from?
Oh, that's a great question. That is a great question. I don't think that you can just have one, and this is not the question your answer looking for. So if I'm throwing a smaller jerkbait, I honestly believe a fluorocarbon line is the best. Either that or copolymer is the best line to have for it, because those smaller baits need to sink a little bit more, and you have great feel with that stuff, and it's just a great tool to use. If I'm using a chatterbait and I'm throwing it in this nasty stuff, I'm going to throw it on 40-pound braid, which I know doesn't sound very fun and you get no stretch. But when I'm throwing it into wood and into a lot of the stuff that I'm throwing, I need to be able to beef it out of that situation. So I'll use that bait. And then if you have a big swing in your temperature during the day, and I know a lot of guys who fish glide baits know this, but if you have a lot of temperature swing in your day where your water in the spring and fall will go down into the 40s and then into the 50s, it'll fluctuate throughout the day. The difference your bait will work on pure mono versus fluorocarbon is significant. So you can have a bait that you love and it's catching fish all morning long, and that heat gets on the water, and all of a sudden you're not catching fish on that bait, but your buddy is. Your buddy's probably throwing a different line. So fluorocarbon will sink at a faster rate in more dense water than you will have when you're throwing a mono. So I know the crazies out there, and I'll call them crazies because I would probably be one if I wasn't a smallmouth fisherman. But if you're glide bait guys and you're fishing a lot of different temperatures, you're going to have at least 2 or 3 different spools of line on yours, because you want your bait to be at a certain level, at a certain cadence. And you notice the difference. I mean, a lot of these guys want the bait 2 foot under the surface, right, or less. And if they'll change their line during the day, because the bait will do different things based on the temperature of the water. So for me, I have fluorocarbon on most of them. On the ones I'm going to throw into really bad stuff, I'm going to have heavy duty, strict, the super lines. And then for some of my finesse stuff, like the crankbait, I really like to throw my crankbait on the bait caster with, the stretchy old stuff. I really like the monofilament for my crankbaits.
If everything was equal, let's say, so we're dealing with all 10-pound tests across the board, what casts farther, braid, fluorocarbon, or monofilament?
That's a really good question. Wow, that's a great question. I like 6-pound fluorocarbon is probably the best casting stuff, but you really got to get that on the line correctly, right? It's just my buddy uses Sunline on his spinning gear and on his casting gear, and he goes about 2 pounds lighter than I would be comfortable with. So 6-pound on his spinning gear and 8-pound on his bait casters. That stuff just casts just dreamy, just dreamy. But you've got guys who are throwing some of the super slick stuff, the super lines, and they cast really well too. I don't know. There's just something about brand new line, brand new monofilament, or brand new fluorocarbon that just really casts so nice. And then you have to realize that, some guides and some roll. It's a combination between the line and the rod that you have, the action of the rod. Some rods load up better and cast better than other rods.
I agree with that too, because you get into especially like spinning stuff, like the diameter of your spool will increase.
But you can take the same line on the same reel and have one professionally installed, right? And the other one, you just do it in your living room and you don't quite get it as tight as it needs to be. And it doesn't cast as well as the one that was put on the spool tight, right? So fluorocarbon's a pain sometimes. Sometimes you have to use warm water or, let it sit for a while or have it, once you find one that works, it's a pretty sweet deal.
Do you use braid to floor a leader with your clients for spinning reels, or do you just go? Okay.
Yeah, I do. I am a big, I don't go long. I go 4 to 6 feet on my fluorocarbon leaders, but I'm a big fluorocarbon leader guy. I like that. Even though We'll tell you that knot, that leader knot is your hitch pin, right? That is your weak point on it. But I just think that there's so many advantages to fluorocarbon that it's worth it.
What's your knot? FG?
The FG knot, I like the FG knot. I play with it. I have like 6 knots that I tie, and it will change on the days. If you use the reverse Albright and you tighten up your line if you can get your wraps over top of your wraps, and you can come through the same hole that you started at and pull them, moisten it and pull it tight. That's a hard knot to beat. But if it's windy out and you've got it and you're not sure where the line has to go in, if you go in the opposite way, if you don't come out the same way you went in, that knot's useless. I mean, it's going to come apart in 10 casts, right? So the FG knot, I suppose if you're an angler that has time to sit there and tie it at night, but I might tie 15 knots during the day, 15 meter knots during the day if it's a bad client day. I don't have time to tie 15 FG knots. But on the weekends, when I'm going through all my equipment, the FG knot's what's going to be tied on everything to start the week out. I can sit. It's the best knot. It just takes forever to tie. And it's terrible to tie in the wind. Terrible.
Oh my God. It really
but I've used like every knot. People send me knots all the time, and I'll use them. And they're usually really pretty knots. They're great casting knots, but they have no knot strength. So either they're breaking right before the knot, right? Because they're just so tiny and they've cinched down so tight. And every time you set the hook on something, it just gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and it breaks right at the knot. I'm afraid of losing a big fish on a knot. So that FG or the Crazy Alberto, until I find something that works better. There's a figure 8 knot that I'm tying. I really like it, and it's holding up pretty good. But I don't know if I ever want to trust a 6-pound bass on one of those.
We got 2 questions left, and one has a little levity. PA Kayak Bassin on Instagram says, Chris, who is your 4th favorite kayak angler behind Jeff Little, Juan, Jed, of course?
My 4th favorite? I'm not answering that question. No way. I'll tell you this much. There are some awesome kayak anglers out here. Nothing to take away from Jeff or Jed, and I haven't fished enough with Juan, although we fished quite a bit, years and years ago. But there are some absolute incredible, I have them as clients, just incredible guys on that kayak. The kayak fishing there's some superstars in our area. There really is. There's some really good kayak fishermen. I would never want to go up against them. What they can do in a kayak, I have a jet boat. I can go almost anywhere I want to go. I can repeat water. I can do stuff. But some of these kayak anglers they're just consistently really, really good. There's a couple guys, local guys here that I'm not giving you a 4th because there are just so many really good ones out there that it's a great question, but I'm not answering it. There's a lot of really good kayak anglers, and they're just getting better all the time.
I agree with that. Let's see. Brew Tank Outdoors. Last question. Where did Thomas launch from and catch him on to get the top 10 this weekend? I'm doing a live stream, Brew Tank, and I'm doing a live stream tomorrow to go through all that stuff because every time tidal fishing starts up, I get 1,000 phone calls and emails like, people don't know how to fish tidal. I want to break it down. It's so simple, it'll drive you mad. I will break that down tomorrow because that's a whole different conversation, boss. The last thing I had for you, though, and I thought this was fascinating, and you're the guy to do it. When it comes to large smallmouth, at least from the studies I've looked through, it's weird how you don't see a lot of like the 10-pound, 9-pound class, but then the new river has produced them, and different rivers have. There's a ton of great fish, but why is it seems like it doesn't produce that next caliber, or am I mistaken?
No, that's a great question. Why do certain rivers? I fish a couple of rivers in New York that consistently produce 6 and 7 pounders consistently, right? They just do. They're and some of it is because they're coming from the lake, and you catch them usually in the spring and fall when they return to the creeks, or they're out foraging in the creeks. The Susquehanna, why we don't see very many 6s, I'm not really sure. It's a great question. It's do they exist? I don't know that there's very many above 6. There's when I say above 6, yes, there are a few out there, but man, I'm telling you, we had 2 5s last week, and I'm telling you, legitimately, throughout the course of the year, sorry about that, guys. Throughout the course of the year, maybe 10, 15.
Is it genetics?
I don't know if it's genetics or if it's just how much effort they have to burn in the river, right? I mean, if you fish Champlain, and there's current in the lake, but if you fish Champlain or Erie or those places, you're going to find those 7 and 8 pounders. I mean, if you fish it long enough, you're going to get those bigger fish. But in the rivers, I'm not so sure that with all the work they have to do to get their forage, that they're ever going to be. We don't have gobies. The gobies have seen a change. They've been game changers for some of these places. The New River is nothing new, right? I mean, seriously, the New River, for 20 years, that place has been just people have been catching giants on that place, right? It's never been a fishery where you go and catch 100, or rarely, right? But man, when you get a big fish there, there's some just monsters on that fish, right? But you also have a different forage base, right? I mean, are you Cisco shad down there? When they would do those water releases in some of those places, I mean, if you didn't have a water release, you weren't. When I was fishing, if you didn't have a water release, you weren't really catching. But when they did that water release, they were throwing up what looked like shad to me, either Cisco shad or some kind of a big bait fish that, I mean, if I didn't recognize it when I was down there, whether it was a alewife or a goat, but something was feeding these fish that made them just. So I don't know if they come out of the reservoirs where they're releasing from, and that's what makes it all go, or if there's something down there that's just making these fish monstrous, or if the weather down there is a little bit softer than our northeast weather, that's making them be able to feed a little bit more throughout the year, not waste time. Because on a cold winter, they're going weeks sometimes without a meal, I think, and that does take a little bit of the body weight away.
I think it's fascinating because, I know for the new, they also have the invasive species, which is the rusty crawfish, but it gets 12 inches long.
Yeah, we don't have them that big, but we do have them here. I mean, we remember when they first got here. That I remember, talking to the Fish Commission, and they were worried about it because it's like, well, nothing's going to eat those. And I can tell you right now that the bass don't care. They don't look at it and go, that 5-inch rusty crawfish looks dangerous to me. I'm not going to eat it. They may spit it out a couple times before they grab it and break its back, but you're gonna swallow it thing one way or the other.
Do you think, without giving it away, there are rivers in upstate New York that could actually bring out some trophies in the next couple of years?
I know guys that are very serious about doing it. Yeah, I think there's a couple of them. They're either attached to they're attached to that strain that has the gobies in them, right? So whether if it's in New York, those rivers that have the gobies, because of the lakes are getting the gobies, and they're spreading out and they're getting big, and they're crushing it. I fished these places almost my entire life and go back to them now and think, what in the world? This is, it was nothing to get 2 and 3 pounds, and now it's nothing to get, every day 4 or 5 fish over 5 pounds in these rivers right now.
Good Lord, that's insane.
I can't do that in Susquehanna. I mean, I've had plenty of days where we've had 8 or 9 fish over 4, and a couple of days where you'll have, a 5 or even 2 5s put into it when it's just incredible. But most of I can go a whole week or 2 without ever getting 5. Maybe 3 weeks sometimes I'll get even close to 5. So it's just, right now, if you're looking for a big fish, this last week and the weeks that are coming up before the spawn are probably your best chance at really getting a legitimately solid 5.5. We've done it 3 times in the last 5 days. And I think that this week we'll do it a couple more times, and I think next week we'll do some. And then I think it's going to be really hard to get them.
I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really appreciate it. Guys, as always, I already have the links up to all of his social media handles. Again, Chris, is there anyone that we can promote, give a shout out to?
No, just there's so many great companies out there. Jig Masters is one that just has helped me out so much with baits. A lot of the local tackle shops, yours as well. It's just we have a lot of great sponsors, but they're the same people that you guys are using, right? Whether it's Jig Masters or whether you're using Z-Man baits, the Big Joshy. There's just a bunch that are out there that are just great stuff. The tackle shop that's helped me out the most is probably Wacky Worm. They make a lot of custom colors for me, and of course, Fit, Custom Movers, these smaller places that just have really opened their doors and allowed us to create some stuff. But listen, support your local tackle shop. That's what needs you the most right now. And that's by supporting them, you're going to support all these other vendors and all these other partners that we have, because they're almost all, selling through your tackle shop. And believe me, the guys who are working the tackle shop are working their hearts out to make their businesses work. So please visit, say hi, show up, have a cup of coffee and buy some baits.
And then, as always, guys, link in the episode description so you can just please go help support Chris, support your local bait makers. It really means a lot. This is how we keep these communities going. And if also, guys, please check out our Patreon. I got permission from Virginia and Maryland departments to start a nonprofit to do supplemental stocking and habitat improvements. So come help support us there. Like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time on Fishing the DMV. Bye.
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you